Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Cybersecurity with me, Chirag Joshi. I'm your friendly CISO who focuses on breaking down the complexity and making cybersecurity truly meaningful, useful, and valuable. Because after all, cybersecurity is about people first, and then about the tech and everything else that comes with it. So, on the show, as a lot of our loyal listeners who I'm very grateful for, as you've seen, we've had a lot of great speakers and a lot of great guests over the years. We've covered everything from cyber journalism and entrepreneurship to cyber risk and zero trust. So it's a complete length and breadth of what we can expect in cybersecurity. We've also heard from lawyers on the show. We talked from great insights from folks who practice and advocate mindfulness. So we tried to make it a show that is not just talking about the technical bits, but also about the art and the magic of cybersecurity. Now, the guest I have on today is somebody who I'm very excited, first of all, that he's agreed to come on the show and talk to us. Uh, and I was trying to find the right way to introduce him because, as you will find out soon, he has such a host of experience and amazing work through his career journey. It's hard to point to one, but the one word that did come to my mind when I was thinking about him is a leader. Uh, he's a leader in the true sense because he is a leader in government, he's a leader in technology, he's a leader on boards, he's a leader in cybersecurity. So, truly unique individual who's so well positioned to have the conversation that I want to have today. And he's Jeff Whitton. And I am glad to formally introduce Jeff on the show. Welcome, Jeff. It is such a pleasure to have you on the show with us today. And I cannot wait to get started on all these great things that we want to talk about. But before I do that, I want to give a quick flavor to what you've done. I said you've done a lot of things, but you are a counselor for Orange. You are a founding director for Iraga, which is a cybersecurity company. You are a board chair for organizations. You serve on so many advisory boards that I've lost count. But what is fascinating also is your journey. You actually have a strong technology background, and that's where essentially you started from. And now you have all these different hats that you wear. You are the with the ASA, New South Wales board as well, and also advisory boards, like I said, with a lot of different areas. So I don't want to get into all of that because if we do, that's going to be the whole show right there. It's all the things that Jeff has done. But I want to hand over to you, Jeff, welcome you on and just give a little bit of flavor about yourself, and then we can get started.
Thanks, Chirag. I feel tired now that you've gone through all of the hats that I wear, but it's a great pleasure to be here today and speaking with you. And you yourself do a lot for the cybersecurity community, and I follow you all the time. So thank you so much, and it's a great honor to be speaking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jeff, so obviously we can put a lot about what you've done, your work in the show notes as well. We'll provide that to the audience. But maybe since I talked about leadership and the word leader that came to mind, maybe we start first with your philosophy to leadership, right? Like all the hats that you wear, is there a core philosophy that informs all of that and allows you to be so effective across all these different domains? If you had to talk about what's your philosophy to leadership, what would that look like?
Well, I think it's leading by example. There's an old saying about leaders that leaders that lead from the front and they force people to follow them, or there are leaders that lead by example and they have people want to follow them. And I think earlier on when you were talking about all the different hats that I do wear, I've been in this industry for just over 40 years now. I'll just say that quickly. I started my career in the technology arena in 1980 and as a telecommunications engineer. And then during the mid-80s, the world was moving into local area networks and computing away from mainframes. And that's when I got involved in technology as a computing profession. But I was fortunate enough during those times that I was what they call the 1980 intake, and I worked for Telecom Australia, who you now probably know as Telstra. And during those years, they were part of the Commonwealth. They were a federal government department. So we were trained by the best. So I'll begin by saying that the mentors that I had, the engineering mentors, both from an engineering sense and a technical sense and a leadership sense, have something that I've gained from other leaders. So, and yeah, for sure, there are natural leaders and there are leaders who learn from others. And but that's my philosophy. You have to respect each and everyone's professional knowledge. And I think a lot of the experts and successful experts always say that you need to employ the right people around you. Your success comes from others, and the others are those that you employ and put around you as the experts. So you let them do their job. You don't tell them how to do their job.
Oh, well said, well said. And I think it's such a powerful thing in terms of leading from the front example and making it about others, right? It's not about you. And I think once that clicks in the mind and actually practice that is a powerful thing for leadership. Now, Jeff, how does cybersecurity for you, like obviously you have a history with being a telecommunications engineer, and cybersecurity has been an evolution of IT security, information security, and now what we call as cyber. How does cybersecurity fit into your world as it stands? But how did you get into this topic, right? Where did it start the journey for you in cyber?
Well, I suppose today the terminology that is used for somebody who has my skills is an expert in every layer of the OSI model. So I was fortunate enough to become an expert in every layer because during the time that I entered this industry, a lot of it was still evolving. So I got in when we were the people who were creating the industry. So it was a little bit easier to become more familiar with each layer because as the technology has evolved since the 80s, each layer of the OSI has become more functional. In the early days, you would have only really sat in the first 4 layers of the OSI model. Now, all 7 layers are truly enabled with the technology that we have today. So from a cybersecurity point, as a technologist, security is also prominent in what you do. If you're configuring networks or you're writing or you're developing applications, you need to consider all of the other aspects of the environment, or we might say the OSI model, right? The impact. What is the impact on what you're developing, building, designing, configuring? And that includes security, of course. More so today, because as we know, the value of someone's personal information, be it corporate-based information, government-based information, defence-based information, or just Jeff Whitton's information, is all valuable and now regulated. So it is an onerous obligation now that on everybody, including company directors, that the protection of all of those spheres of information is paramount and of personal and national security importance. So how did I get into cybersecurity? Well, really wasn't, as you say, called cybersecurity in the early days. It was just security of systems and information, which were part of network-based security. And some of it I can't talk about, some of it I can talk about. But working in a large telco like Telecom or Telstra today, initially because we were part of the federal government in the early days, we were seconded into different areas of government or different agencies, be it law enforcement, state, federal, military. And our skills as telco people, because that particular environment was regulated or not able to be accessed by anyone outside of the telco environment because of privacy reasons. Whenever there was any work that needed to be done from any of those agencies, then that was subject to federal law, and that information had to be gathered basically from instruction from federal judges, right? So in short, as a telco person, I was trained in signalling and machine language and all of those areas. So our job was to gather information and pass it to the relevant authorities as requested. So that's where a lot of, I suppose what I see today in the new world of cybersecurity, the fundamentals have not changed. Sure, we have different tool sets that sit above and in the application layers that are software based, but the foundations of how they gather information and how they treat that information has not changed. And that goes for hackers as well. So the tools they use to do what they do, to exfiltrate information or attack an environment, are the basic ways we did those things in the early days. So I hope that answers some of that question.
It does, and it does more. I think, firstly, I love the fact that you started with talking about the OSI model in this response, and that's what, when I introduced you, is the breadth of experience, right? It's you're talking about company director responsibilities and the obligations, but you're also talking about the OSI layer, and that just talks about the whole gambit of cybersecurity. And you're right, and you're absolutely right on the fact that the foundations haven't changed. And a part of the reason why, in my view, we still grapple with some of the security challenges is because a lot of the traditional infrastructure on which these protocols were built weren't designed necessarily with security in mind, right? When you create, like when the IP protocol and the TCP protocol were created, and you look at the old papers there, security was kind of a thought, but it wasn't the primary focus. And which is why now we are trying to play catch up with some of these things, and which is why we have a generational opportunity as we think about things like AI on doing them perhaps securely up front, because once the genie's out of the bottle, and some would argue it probably is, it becomes hard to retrofit that. So really good points on your cyber journey and all the experience that has shaped up. For those of our international listeners, and I know we have a fair number of those, Telstra is a really prominent telecommunications company in Australia. And they're a lot bigger than just telco. They do a lot of things in the data world, in other aspects as well. So Jeff's history with Telstra goes before they were called Telstra. So that's pretty awesome. Now, Jeff, I wanna talk about and move to the idea that you have a unique vantage point, right? You understand technology, you understand cyber, you've been doing this for years. But as you sit on boards, and you have other fellow board members, not all of them, those directors, are as equipped in cybersecurity or technology, but as the regulatory landscape has changed, and I think that's probably arguably one of the biggest changes in the recent years is the regulatory expectations, because cyber became such an integral part of our lives, not just from an information perspective, but also, to your point, national defense, with operational technology security, our physical world as well, manufacturing, mining, defense, all the rest. The role of regulations obviously got enhanced. And now when you think about boards, their roles got elevated around cybersecurity as well. So APRA, which is our financial services regulator, in their CPS 234 standard, said it very clearly. Cybersecurity is a board responsibility. It is not an IT function. It's not going to be relegated that way. ASICs come and said something similar with regards to the expectations that they have. SEC in the US, Security and Exchanges Commission, has made that obvious with their new rulings related to the filings by listed companies every year in cyber risk management. So all of this is saying that the boards are now expected to actually not just listen to CISOs, but be able to challenge and adequately understand that. So in your role, being the expert in this area, and now as a board chair or board director, how do you communicate with your fellow board directors? What are the type of conversations that you have that allow them to be more effective?
Well, sure. You're right, Chirag. It's and So today it's a bit better because a lot of technology is so much part of our life that now board directors are much more familiar with technology. But, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they may not. And most boards are what we call skill-based boards, right? So a lot of the members of a board will be either from a legal background or an accounting background, or a background that is specific to the industry board that they're sitting on. If it's mining, they could have a mining background. Finance could have a financial background, and etc. But the thing about boards of directors is that traditionally, and they should never be, but they are starting to have to be, not operational. And what I mean by that is that they are strategic. They are there for governance, risk and compliance purposes in any company. Their role is for strategic purposes to sit at the very highest level of the organisation for strategic purposes. But they own the risk, no matter if it's a financial risk or an environmental risk. Now it's cyber. So the things that would normally govern the thinking of a board is first and foremost the well-being of the company, its financial position from a fiscal point of view. So they are obligated for those things. If they are in organisations that could have an impact on the environment, that's another risk that they've got to contend with, because if they're mining or if they're oil or whatever it may be, or even if it's a building company that's dealing with asbestos, if it impacts the environment, then those things can impact them. But now they have a new one, which is cybersecurity, which has recently been added in Australia. If I talk about just Australia, in 2018, under the Privacy Act, they changed the Act to incorporate cybersecurity, and which comes under the Privacy Act of 2018. And it was like around 1998, I think, but they revised it in 2018. What did that mean? It meant that the risk ownership for the loss of information in an organisation resides with the board. So that you see a new saying in boards now that cybersecurity is not a technology decision, but it is a business decision. So directors had to come up to speed with what did that mean for them, because as a board director, and I've sat in boards for about 30 years. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Company Directors, and what does that mean? The board directors and companies are subject to the Corporations Law Act, and that now constitutes, things like always has fiscal obligations and risk, but now it incorporates cybersecurity, as you're talking about, right? So how do they grapple with that? Well, they understand that all they need to know is what are the regulatory requirements from the regulator. What does the regulator require the organisation to do? And as you just said, some organisations have several regulators. All of them are covered under the Privacy Act. Some of them are now covered under the Critical Infrastructure Bill of Australia, which covers their if they are responsible for services that are deemed by government as critical infrastructure, which they are now. There is 11 of in Australia. There was only around 5 before that, but now there are 11. And then, of course, you've got APRA, you've got ASIC, but APRA have got their regulators. So each industry potentially has many regulators that they've got to now report to with regard to cybersecurity. And that can be quite confusing for them, right? So as you know, there's the Office of Information, the Commissioner for the Privacy Act, that if an organisation has a breach, then they have 24 hours to report that breach to the Commissioner. That then gives them some space. The Commissioner will give them some space to find out how it occurred, what they're going to do about resolution, and what they're going to do about protecting the organisation in the future. So when you're getting back to how do the directors handle it? It all comes down to the risk, how they measure risk, right? Directors always deal with risk and governance and funding, right? And any CISO out there, that a lot of CISOs ask me, how do I communicate to the board, right? It's quite easy. When it comes to cybersecurity, a lot of what I've seen in the past, and not so much from CISOs, but from probably vendors, and if there's any vendors on the call, I apologise, but it's the fear factor that they play on, right? And sure, I get that comes into play, but boards understand better if you speak to them in a language they understand from a compliance and risk basis. Sure, and then they'll ask, what is the cost, right? Because they own the risk. CISOs and CEOs and CIOs may be responsible for managing the risk, but the board own it. And the communication between operational teams and the board should be very fluid when it comes to cybersecurity. There should already be policies, procedures, playbooks in place that the CISO, CIO, CEO, and the executive team and the board should have already in place, so that should they do have a breach, that the mechanisms for communication to the board from the operational teams are well practiced and well known, right? So I hope that sort of gives a little bit of insight, Chirag, into some of those things.
Definitely, and I think it's important for the audience and for all of us to appreciate, right? What you just mentioned is what goes on when you're a director and you have a liability, right? Like that's the first thing that comes to mind, is the things that you're on the hook for, and those will obviously dictate how you approach things. And to your point about articulating things in the risk context is such a powerful point. In my cybersecurity books, the most recent one, the 7 rules, and the first rule is cybersecurity is about the business, essentially, and the second one is cybersecurity risk management exercise. And that is for me, it's something that is very foundational, is if you can explain things in the context of risk and financials, put fear aside, because fear doesn't really, like, people like you and most board directors, experienced directors have seen things. So when somebody's trying to sell fear, they smell it, or trying to sell uncertainty and doubt, that's not going to work. But I think articulating risks, to your point, in a way that resonates with them, is aligned to what the business is actually doing, is such a powerful way, as opposed to just saying we have a high risk for cyber. Like, what does that mean? Well, what does high mean in that case, right? Is, well, maybe you have an elevated risk because of unpatched vulnerabilities to your critical payment systems. I think that's the level of conversation that you need to translate to. So what you said there is powerful, and also the fact that how more board directors are becoming technology savvy, but they have the areas of specialization. So knowing who you're talking to and engaging with them is great advice for CISOs. Now, Jeff, one question I have, and this is something that is becoming quite interesting in the CISO community, is I'm not sure if you've been following the developments that happened in the US, where the CISO for SolarWinds was directly charged, right, for fraud and misleading investors. And then we had a similar case, while not necessarily exactly the same, but you had the CISO for Uber, who got into trouble for a different purpose. So you're now starting to see CISOs get directly involved and implicated in things. So it's creating a lot of concern amongst the community, is while some CISOs have the title, they may not necessarily really be CISOs, right? Because they have a technical specialization to them, but they haven't been trained or are not yet equipped to deal with all the additional responsibilities that the position has. So in your view, as you look at the industry, as you think about this with your trained mind in this case, how do you see the role of the CISO evolve? should it be a true executive position sitting side by side with the CFO, the CIO, the chief legal officer with the CEO in that room? Or do you think that role is perhaps better under a CIO function, but with an elevated level of visibility and responsibility? Or should the role be split into multiple different roles? What do you think is the right approach as you think about it from a board director with that ownership perspective?
Thanks, Chirag. CISOs for me should report directly to the CEO, because they have a risk authority. They are an executive at the same. You've got your CIO, which is looks after the technology responsibilities, but then you've got the CISO, of course, which is looking after the cybersecurity. And what I've seen many times is the disengagement of this. I don't think a lot of organisations understand what the role of the CISO is, right? They've got to understand that first, right? That the role of a CISO is to implement the strategies from the board, by the way, from the board, of what their cybersecurity posture is, right? And once they put that in place, then it's the engagement and relationship between the technical teams and the security teams on who is responsible for what in the network, right? It's an ownership battle, because what I've seen from technical people, CIOs and their teams, is that for a long time, they own the environment. They are responsible for it, for the configuration of it, for the support of it, for any new things that come into it. And what happens is there becomes a rift between the technical teams and the security teams when the security teams have implemented strategies that are now sitting above the technical teams about what they need to do when they are doing new implementations or procurement of hardware. It has to meet with the regulatory or the strategies that have been developed by the board and the security teams that are in place. Now, what I see a lot in the industry is that there's this battle between the CIO and the CISO about who's in charge, right? Now, that's a leadership role. That's the CEO's job, to sort of sit them both down and say, right, this is how this is going to work, right? This is the role of a CISO, right? So should the CISO become part of the technical team? Would that make it better? It could do, but you still need the security team to be neutral from the technology team so that they are able to independently assess their own environments, and they are independently able to work with their technical teams to say, this is what needs to be, this is the security posture of our networks, this is how it should be implemented, this is how it should be managed, this is what we do, right? Getting back to, so that's sort of a reporting structure environment, right? But I think the first and foremost, the problem is that all businesses, some get it right, but most do not understand what the role of the CISO is. They know they need a CISO, and a lot of folk say to me, Jeff, there's a CISO position available, I'm going to go for it, because they see it as a middle management or a senior management role, which it is, right? But it comes with a lot of responsibilities and a lot of obligations and a lot of risk. Don't simply go for the role because you've got management skills. You need to have a really good understanding of cybersecurity and what a CISO role entails and the responsibilities. Because when things go wrong, and they will, all organisations, as you know, Chirag, will have a breach. There is no silver bullet. All best efforts to protect an organisation today may be different rules tomorrow. So when an organisation is subject to a breach, the board, the leadership team, everyone are going to be coming to the CISO. And I won't say they need someone to blame, but they need someone to blame. That's how you've got to look at it, right? So before you put your hand up to take on the CISO role, be very confident in your own ability. The other thing that you need to understand is that when you are taking on a role as a CISO, what does the organisation believe the CISO does, right? Because a CISO can be in a situation where they don't have the cooperation of the rest of the business because they don't understand what the CISO is. They know that they need a CISO, as I said. They say, look, we got a CISO. And the CISO then says, well, this is the problem in our organisation. I've identified our security risks. This is the resolution pathways that we need to implement. It's going to cost money. If the business doesn't listen to them, then they are in that CISO is sitting alone, carrying a lot of risk because the business isn't listening to what they're trying to implement in their organisation. So hence the reason. And your point about CISOs now being subject to legal ramifications, that goes for all executive, right? So there have been situations, getting back to why it's important that the executive team, CEOs, COOs, CFOs, CISOs and CIOs have an honest and open approach to reporting breaches to their board, right? Because if they don't, if an organisation suffers a breach and then the regulator discovers that there have been misconduct or negligence, they will first start with the board because the board own it. And if the board can prove that the operational teams did not implement the strategies that the board approved, or that the operational teams did not report back to the board of a breach within a timely manner, in other words, they try and hide the issue from the board, then the executive team can be subject to common law activities that you don't want to get caught up in, right? So, as always, open and honest communications between the operational teams and the board is a must, because at the end of the day, when an organisation does suffer a breach, the reason that we have commissioners and Signals Directorate and the Cybersecurity Centre, and I'm talking only about Australia for those folks that aren't, but most countries have these organisations. They're not there to hit you with a big stick. They are there to help you. When an organisation has a breach, all of those organisations come together to try and to resolve and identify the issue.
No, well, absolutely, and it's such the relationships that we have, these external agencies, is such a powerful thing. RACSC and other institutions available to us. But Jeff, like you obviously, as with all your responses, you've covered so much ground and provided so many insights. I think the point that you talked about related to, just the idea of a CISO and the role of a CISO, as something that I talk very often, because not everybody needs to be a CISO to be successful in cybersecurity. Not everybody should be a CISO. There are other pathways. But if you want to be a CISO, and I think all the points that you bring home here are absolutely essential, is having that clarity for organizations. Because, unlike the role of a CFO, which is largely understood, big, small, people know what a CFO does. CISO could be anything from a person responsible for looking after the IT infrastructure, patching things, running identity tools, to somebody who is essentially large in the executive role, who sits in meetings, sets strategies, sets budgets, has responsibilities for regulations and compliance. So it could be anything in between, and far too often I've seen people struggle, and they don't clarify this. They look at the title and they think everybody understands what they do. They really don't, because even within government, and I've been fortunate to work in different industries. You could be a CISO for a massive, for New South Wales here, could be a CISO for a whole portfolio which is a massive super agency, or it could be for a smaller agency. And your mandate could be quite different, and the extent and the scope of your role could be quite different. So I think it's really key as people think about it. But also, if you're a true executive, you got to approach it that way. You got to have your right insurances in place as well for liability. So I think all of those things come with you understanding the role better and not thinking of it as a technical role, which it really isn't. You need to be technically minded, I reckon, to be effective, because as you said, Jeff, is if you don't understand what OSI model is, at least at a high level, well, it becomes challenging, because once you start getting into real conversation, it becomes hard to actually get a sense of what you're doing, how you're leading teams. So I do think having a foundational understanding of technology does help you be more effective. But there's one question I want to explore a bit more, Jeff, that you brought up, and that was around the strategy set from the board. Now, along those lines, risk appetite statements, a very important aspect of good cybersecurity practices, because risk appetite statements dictate what is an organizational appetite to invest proportionately to how far you want to get to security, right? There is no such thing as perfect security, and nobody has endless budgets, right? So we all have to make trade-off. And to me, good risk appetite statements serve as a very important way of making those trade-offs. Now, your experience, Jeff, with boards and how you've seen risk appetite statements over the years, what does good risk appetite statement to look like to you, especially when it comes to cybersecurity? I've seen people get into trouble when they write things like, "We have no appetite for cyber risk," which is really impossible in this day and age. But even if they say we have low risk appetite for cybersecurity, is that sufficient to make good decisions? So, what is your thought process on risk appetite statements?
Yeah, good point. Generally, when I see boards that say they have a zero appetite, that they don't want any breaches, then that comes with a lot of dollar signs and many decimal points, right? So you soon get them back into an arena of what's achievable, right? So what I find with most boards, that if you want to get a benchmark of success, is to look at certifying the organisation with a relevant framework, like an ISO 27001 or something like that, right? Those things are achievable because directors understand that type of philosophy, right? And I think, Chirag, you're going to see my prediction with cybersecurity, if it keeps moving the way it is, and it will for a little while, is that companies are all mandatory for an organisation is to have a financial audit. You're going to see companies going to have be forced to have cybersecurity audits by independent organisations, right? What does that do? Well, that then drives that frames their appetite around how they deal with things, right? Because all of a sudden, the decision making, well, not the decision making, but the board get a better view of the organisation, both from insiders who are, I suppose, obligated to implement the strategies and processes and the desires of the board into the operational parts of the business. How does the board know that is occurring? It's not as though they mistrust their operational teams or whatever else, but they need a way to check the balance, have checks and balances, right? So, and over the many years prior to cybersecurity, most organisations would fail because of mismanagement of their financial assets, right? Shareholder funds, or the way the business runs, because what they get from the operational people are their P&L statements, their balance sheet statements, and part of a good, any director should be able to understand their financial reports, right? You don't have to be expert at them, but you need to understand what you're seeing, right? It's the same with cybersecurity. So all of the reports come out. A lot of people say to me, what reports should I give to a board about our cybersecurity? Do they need all the logs? All they want to know is the risk, right? Aside from everything else, yes, we have implemented all of these millions of dollars worth of tools to manage our organisation. But where is our risk still? right? They want to know where that hole is potentially, right? Because when you're trying to manage risk, that costs a lot of money, as you say. What is the appetite? And then we have what we call acceptable risks, right? That is where the board understands that, yes, we have a risk in a particular application, but that application is our core application for our company. To fix the risks would mean we'd have to roll out that system and put a new one in, or we would have to spend X amount of millions of dollars from the vendor to fix it. So what they do is they put a framework in place for your risk appetite to say, righto, we understand it's a risk. We know for us to overcome that risk, it's going to cost 1 million, 2 million, whatever dollars to fix it. The business doesn't have the budget to do that, but we will put a plan in place to do it over a period of time. But we will put it in our risk register as an acceptable risk that the board is aware of, but we need to deal with, right? But getting back to the real question, acceptable risk, right? It's about putting in a framework that enables the board to measure what their posture is, right? And generally that's like an ISO or like all companies should, I hope, at least have a self-assessed framework like Essential 8s. But for boards, you will find that that's not enough, right? And as I say, and I will say it again, it's not as though they don't trust the team that's doing the self-assessment. It's about how do we have an assessment that we can then balance between the two, right? That's why they have financial auditors that come in and do external financial auditing. A lot of boards now are opting for external auditors to do their cybersecurity audits at the same time as they do their fiscal audits, by the way. So, and then a lot of those organisations will say the quick way for us to measure your organisations against controls, like financial controls, is to have something like an ISO 2700, right? Because all those controls are then in place, they're measurable, they can go into the organisation, they can assess the teams about their understanding of those controls, and then everyone has a better understanding of quickly where the risks lie. But the thing I will say, and you must tell your board, the ISO frameworks, any framework does not protect your company from hackers, right? It puts you in a better position to understand your risk. But for a hacker, they don't care if you've got ISO 2700 or Essential 8s, right? And I often tell boards that, right? Because they think once they have something like this, we're now protected, right? You're better protected. You have a better understanding of your risk, but those things aren't going to stop the potential for a breach.
Brilliantly said. You can't. And I think this is where the resilience aspect comes in. Is it's not just securing things, it's also being resilient. So when something does go bad, like there are, ways of responding that are prepared. And the board has hopefully been involved with good tabletop exercises or good simulation exercises where they've actually been tested in their muscle memories, such that because they'll have to make decisions when it comes to things of that nature. So understanding that, accepting that, and being prepared for it will then allow them to be a lot more effective when incidents do happen, because as we know, they're not completely avoidable. But your point is really powerful around your prediction of there will be these mandated audits, as we are learned with ITGC as part of the financial statements, right? That's such a good point, because it does give you that check and challenge and independence when it comes to it, because a big problem in cybersecurity, even for regulated industry, is controls testing and the capability of the tester, the design of the tester, and the functional independence of the tester. Because unless you have that assurance is hard to gauge. However, if you have something like ISO or you have NIST cybersecurity framework that I also really like, because they give you a holistic view to approaching cybersecurity for your organization. And if you approaching that, you identified your risks, you achieved a certain level of maturity, and you can articulate that story of the risk buy down that comes with a control maturity increase. think that gives boards confidence that this is an ongoing maturity exercise that they're a part of, and it's never really done. Even once you reach a certain level of maturity, you got to maintain that because you work in a context of an evolving threat landscape. You know, different threat actors. Some want to make money. Some are nation states want to get in advantages in matters of warfare or diplomacy or shortcut to economic prosperity. So there are all of those things which will persist because that's human tendency, that's human nature. But I mean, having a framework to work within which allows you to benchmark with peers, have a more thoughtful process, does put you in a good standing with your boards, I reckon. So thank you for your advice there. Look, Jeff, you've been amazingly generous with your time, and I'm very respectful of it. So I'll just finish on this last question, and this is more about what is that advice that you would give to leaders or to professionals, even to people like myself, as you think, because you obviously done all these great things in your career and you continue to do them. So you haven't really stopped. You are still continuing to go on and scale higher mountains. What has allowed you to function at such a high level over the years? You mentioned your leadership philosophy, but is there anything that you think has allowed you to function at this level? And what advice would you give to folks who want to follow your footsteps?
I think it's creating a good network of peers, right? Always remember who you meet in life, who you work with in life, because our industry is so small, and you'll always see each other again. But it's when you're in time of need, you can always reach out to your community and raise an issue because someone will have the answer, right? I've been blessed to be able to work with some of the most brilliant minds on this planet, and that's what you need to surround yourself with, and it's vice versa, right? Make yourself available to your peers. If your peers reach out to you, help them, right? It's not always about money, right? It's about creating friendships, lifelong friendships, right? And one of the and you never stop learning, right? In our industry, there's never this level that you're going to get to unless you only want to sort of specialize. You're never going to stop learning, right? Because the industry changes, the technology changes, the rules, the laws, the regulations change. So you've really got to keep yourself, if you wish to be at the peak, on top of what's happening, right? You're never going to be expert. I'm not an expert. I've just been around a long time and I know a lot of things and seen a lot of people. But I suppose my success has always come from surrounding myself with good people. Surround yourself with good people, and be there for them when they need you, right? And they'll always need you. The thing I'd like to also say, Chirag, is that we talk about regulation and compliance, but what we see in our industry, the technology, the broader industry, is that it's unregulated, right? Now, if you look at the vendors who are selling product into the marketplace, they can sell the product into the marketplace without having the product that is standard where it has no vulnerabilities, right? They generally put the product into the marketplace with vulnerabilities and it's left to the marketplace to identify those issues and to fix them, right? And a lot of people have asked me, has it always been like this? And I said, no. Traditionally, we had IEEE standards where everything was built on an IEEE standard base. Then along came open source, right? Open source was fantastic because it allowed innovators to excel and go beyond being locked into proprietary systems, right? But what that's then created is the world in which we live in now, because all of us are trained the same way. I say to people, people see hackers as different to you and I, Chirag, right? The only thing that makes you different is your morals, right? So you're either a white hat or a black hat, right? So for 50 years, all of us have been trained to build backdoors into our systems, right? For resilience purposes, not for hacking purposes, right? but to be able to fix things in a timely manner when they went wrong. Now the world is asking us to close those doors that have been opened for 50 years, right? So you've got to go back through all of those systems that are still legacy-based systems today that have got backdoors in them everywhere. And that's what I say when I speak to leaders in government, is that the challenge for our industry, for our people who work in this industry, is that we're playing catch up, and there is a lot of work to do. And you just need to be open and honest with the people that you're dealing with. When they ask you a question, can this be fixed? Give them the truth. Don't be afraid to tell them the truth, right? It doesn't mean that you're diminishing your level of skill or reputation in front of that person. It means that you're telling them the facts, right? That there is no silver bullet at the moment. We'll get there, but it's going to be a rocky road for the moment, because there are a lot of legacy systems still out there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I hope that helps, Chirag.
Oh, it does. I mean, firstly, the advice that you give of building a strong community, being part of it and contributing to it. I mean, that's really awesome advice. You know, you do need to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, and that's not a threat to you. That's actually allowing you to grow. So I think having that humility, but also likewise having that ownership of running your own career, of learning things. But the regulations aspect is such a powerful one, right? Is what is the expectation when you launch a product or service? And you're right, it's a hard one. We have a lot of past legacy to clean up, but we can also set the tone for what the future should be, and which is why I liked what a lot of what is in our Australian cyber strategy 2030 is it does talk about safe technology, and it does, in a way, it does introduce the idea of having some mandatory requirements for things like IoT devices that are so pervasive in our lives and everywhere these days. Should they exist? Then people sometimes get too caught up with the mechanics of it, and I get it, that's important, right?
Yeah.
But it's also important to set the tone, to set the vision, because that's what a strategy should do. It can't tell you every how, but it should tell you the what and the why. And you exactly brought up that point of, why should we be in a position where we are expected to look at vulnerabilities, fix them? Why should we be in a position that, all these products shipped to us have defaults that are so obvious? Why can't they be unique to each product, right? So at least you take the low-hanging fruit of the equation, because there has to be, that's the role of a government, to your point, right? Is to make that safe environment. So really powerful point, and that's a topic that deserves a conversation in its own right. Is what is too much governance, or regulations rather, and what is the right mix? So perhaps something that we can park for another conversation, because I know I could keep talking to you all day, Jeff, and keep learning from you all day. So, but with respectful of to your time, I want to say thank you again. It's been an amazing pleasure having you on the show and all the insights that you shared. I know for a fact that the audience will greatly benefit from all of them. So thank you once again. Really appreciate it. And to our audience, thank you as always for tuning in and all the support and messages that you share with us. I'm glad that we provide value, and thank you for being on this journey with us. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks, Chirag. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.